Let me introduce to you Dr. Eyal Baruch, who is from the Department of Jewish Art and Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology here from Bar-Ilan University, and whose fields of specialization are Jewish art and Jewish society and material culture during the Hellenistic, Roman and Byzantine periods. And we are very much looking forward to have his lecture on decorations in the Palatial mansion of Jerusalem, wealth and ideology.
The palatial building uncovered in the upper city of Jerusalem is one of the most impressive buildings known from the land of Israel in the Roman period. The structural size, dated to the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE, is more than 600 square meters, and it includes a large courtyard, a system of room, and ritual baths. One of the striking features of the building is the use of decoration, mosaics and walls, plasters with stuccos and fresco. And let's see some of slides of the house. As you can see, this is a big courtyard, and actually the typical, this central courtyard is typical to the houses in the land of Israel during the Hellenistic in the Roman period. In this area you can see 3 ritual baths, and also another one is here. But in this lecture I will concentrate, this is one of them, is with double entrance. It's also simple floor mosaic. Here it's another is a simple ritual bath and also a floor mosaic. But in this lecture I will concentrate only in this part of the house. As you can see, in all those rooms we found wall decorations. And now I will describe the rooms from number 3 through the reception hall and finally to those 3 small rooms. Room 3, located south of the central courtyard, is decorated with alternating wide and narrow fresco panels, similar to the models found in the 3rd Pompeian style. An elaborate reception hall located to the east of the courtyard is decorated with white molded plaster that imitates Asher stones of different size and draft margins, placed upon a foundation that continue along the length of the walls. The central part of the wall consists of resting between layers, arranged in the form of head and beam. In this slide you can see the reconstruction of this reception hall. Sylvia Rosenberg notes that the arrangement of the stones in this manner is unusual in the Hellenistic masonry style, but that a number of examples are found in the Pompeian first style. The difference between this masonry style and the first Pompeian style lies in the arrangement of the area dividing the wall. As you can see in this slide, the left one is an example from Delos, in the right is from Pompeii. And the difference are in the arrangements of the so-called stones. This masonry style is also found in rooms 5 to 7 that are adjacent to the atrium from which they are entered. During the course of the excavation, it became clear that the white plaster was composed of few layers attached to one another. The upper layer being fashioned in relief, while the lower layer were painted in different colors and made in technique of fresco. In room 5, the second layer features an architectonic design, a small edicule with double framing, similar to example of the 3rd Pompeian style. You can see it closer. As you can see, the first layer is the fresco, and the second layer is the stucco. The fresco is very smooth, so they made all those small holes to stick the stucco on it. It is therefore possible to discern in this structure 2 different styles of decoration appearing in 2 stages. The latter stage includes stucco, creating an imitation of ashlar stone, characteristic of the masonry style or the first Pompeian style, while beneath it is an earlier stage of frescoes in various colors similar to the third Pompeian style. The renovation of this house and the changes in the wall decoration occurred a short time before 70 CE, apparently during the rebellion against Rome, and it wasn't finished due to the destruction of Jerusalem. This masonry style was widespread in the land of Israel during the Hellenistic period through the end of the 1st century BCE, when its practice disappeared almost completely from the decoration of dwelling houses, but continued to exist in public buildings and in tombs. The third Pompeian style is dated to the time of Augustus, around 15 BCE, and was common until the mid-1st century CE. It follows, therefore, that in Jerusalem the use of decoration was reversed. In the first stage, it used the third Pompeian style, which was considered the modern style of the period, while during the second period, that which was destroyed in the Great Rebellion of 70 CE, they used the more archaic style, which had gone out of style decades earlier. How is it possible to explain this phenomenon? I would like to suggest that the reason of the use of the earlier style in the Palatial complex in Jerusalem is rooted in the cultural changes which took place in Judea and Jerusalem during the eve of the rebellion against Romans. In order to confirm this thesis, we first need to understand the significance of decorations of walls and use of fresco or architectural details in the house. Decoration is of great importance for the messages that the householder wishes to convey to his visitor. An inscription on a public building of any kind celebrates the ruler who built the structure, whereas the decoration is in private house is an address that honors the owner of the house and send a message: I built this, or this is who I am, and this is a social group to which I belong. The easiest way to create an impression is by means of impressive wall paintings or mosaics. Vitruvius notes that the residential buildings during the Roman period reflect a certain social status, and that the nature of the house is determined by the social considerations. The social obligations referred to by Vitruvius is the ceremony of salutation between the paterfamilias patron and the clients. Hence, the orientation in the Roman residential building, the atrium house or peristyle house, is focused upon the viewpoint of the guest observer who visits the house. This house was built around a long axis in which the tabulanium or trochlinium, which was added to the peristyle house, were located in the rear. The cline, the couches, in the trochlinium faced the entrance, so that in practice they reflect the entire house to the entrance. It is worthy to note that the decorations in the atrium house and the peristyle house were concentrated primarily in the public part of the house, along the axis leading from the entrance hall via the atrium to the tabulanium. The cubiculum, located on the side of the atrium throughout the length of the axis leading from the entrance, were also decorated. Decoration in Roman house thus served as a means of conveying messages, and the decorations of the walls and floor played a central function in the atmosphere which the owner of the house wished to create within this architectonic space. There are numerous studies dealing with the significance of the four Pompeian style. According to those researchers, the four styles, in addition to the stylistic and technical differences, reflect different social and political realities. The first Pompeian style is the earliest and the simplest among the four, and it originated in the Hellenistic masonry style. The first style is used not only to decorate houses, but also appears in public buildings, temples, and tombs. In the first Pompeian style, the room is closed by the fact that imitates three-dimensional ashlar stone construction, and the Trompe-l'oeil relates to the imitation of building in marble, in purpose being to bring the public style of architecture into the residential house. This style, unlike the other three, is not decorative, and the use of color therein is intended to imitate different kinds of stone. As you can see in this slide, it's all different kinds of color that different stones. The third Pompeian style is similar from the conceptual viewpoint to the first style in that both styles create sealed walls that closed off the room. The third style has straight walls lacking a feeling of depth, and the architectonic illustration is much less striking than in the second style. This style was intended to create decoration presenting a wide variety of decorative and exotic motifs drawn against a flat and closed surface, black, red, or white. This peculiar architecture was intended for purpose of division of the wall into panels, accomplished by the use of thin pillars and ornamental details. The third Pompeian style reflects, according to many researchers, changes that took place in the wake of the new code of values promulgated by Augustus, thus according to Pliny the Elder. Another substantial and important difference between the two styles relates to the technique by which they were made and the kinds of craftsmen or artists who executed the work. The first style was done in stucco with molded plaster, which was done by a craftsman who was expert in plastering walls. As against that, the third style was done in fresco, in which involved a painting upon the plaster while it was still wet, and its final stage thus required painters and not only artisans such as those needed for the first style. In this style, the use was made of a wide variety of paintings, some of religious or philosophical nature, requiring the work of the experienced expert artists. As a result of this, the third style represented the householder as a man of culture, refinement, familiar with Greek and Roman culture, and served as a suitable background for the ceremony of salutatio. Let us now return to the Palatial house in Jerusalem and attempt to understand the significance of the substitution of modern decoration by archaic decoration. The use of an archaic style covering over modern style is not unique to the Palatial house in Jerusalem, but also appears in a number of houses in Pompeii, such as the house of the Fan and the house of Salus, and I want to show you one example. It's the plan of the house of Fan. It's a very famous one because these mosaics, Alexander mosaics, that's located in this room. But also, again, I concentrated on the decoration in this house. In this house, we found that all the decoration, from the vestibule through the atrium, continue to the first peristyle and back to the second peristyle, all those walls are decorated with the first Pompeian style. Here you can see this is the atrium, this is the vestibule, decorated with the first Pompeian style, also the atrium, decorated with the first Pompeian style. Here we look from the atrium to the first peristyle, also the first peristyle decorated with the first Pompeian style, and in the back you can see only the columns of the second peristyle, and here you can see also the first Pompeian style in the second peristyle. The use of the first style in these houses appears specifically in the public space within the house, a point noted by a number of scholars. Bruno said that the Pompeian first style in Italy in the later Hellenistic period was probably the very symbol of Greek culture. Laidlaw, in her study on the first style, states that the use of an early archaic style reflects the connection of the style to feeling of restraint and previous values. In her opinion, the final owners of those houses made a conscious statement about their own conservative values, or perhaps rather about the values of the clientele he was trying to attract. Zevi notes that the use of the first style was done with the aim of preserving the early familial identity. Regarding the palatial mansion in Jerusalem, Sylvia Rosenberg said that the replastered walls in the palatial mansion seems to suggest nostalgia for the ancient and the more restricted traditional Hellenistic style of decoration, as against the opulent decorative trend on the Roman road. I would like to elaborate upon Rosenberg's explanation and to argue that the use of the archaic style in the palatial mansion in Jerusalem does not derive from nostalgia for the earlier values expressed by the first style, but rather and foremost for opposition to the contemporary Roman style. The reason for the use for this early style in the palatial mansion in Jerusalem is rooted, in my estimation, in cultural changes which occurred in Judea and Jerusalem on the eve of the Great Rebellion. These changes found expression, as we shall see below, in the 18 decrees. The term "the decrees of the 18 things" relates to a series of rabbinic edicts in which the halacha was decided according to the school of Shammai, which generally tended towards strictness. These are some of the laws which they stated in the upper room of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion when they went up to visit him. They took a vote, and the house of Shammai outnumbered the house of Hillel. Many scholars have dealt with the subject of the 18 decrees, but due to lack of time, I will only relate to those conclusions of research which are relevant to our discussion. What were the 18 decrees? This is not a simple one, and as Ben Shalom has shown in his study on School of Shammai, the matters were not even clear to the end of the Tannaitic period, and all the more so during that of the Amoraim. However, the common denominator of all those sources dealing with these decrees is the distancing from and avoidance of contact with non-Jews. The primary purpose of the 18 decrees was to create separation between Gentiles and Jews, and this in order to prevent, insofar as possible, any penetration of Hellenic cultural influences, and particularly of the dominant Roman culture. The school of Shammai headed the struggle against the Romans in the political realm, and their zealous worldview found expression, among other things, in the 18 edicts, which were directed and foremost against Roman culture. Roman culture is a broad concept encompassing the acceptance of the Roman way of life in all its various aspects, from its glorious public aspects to everyday life. As we have shown above, decoration constituted a very important element in the Roman house and in the messages which the householder wished to convey to his visitors. Its decoration testified in both the economic and cultural wealth of the owner. True, the plan of the Palatial mansion in Jerusalem is not based upon Roman model atrium or peristyle. In contrast, the wall decoration in this house in the first stage are in the typical Roman style of the period, indicating that the owner wished to present himself as a cultured, modern person familiar with the ways of the world. However, shortly thereafter, the decorations were exchanged for an archaic masonry style. There seems no doubt that its initial stage, the Palatial mansion, was, in terms of decoration, a very modern house that was close to the standards of the houses of the wealthy people in Rome. Moreover, it seemed clear that the adoption of the modern style of decoration expressed the householders' wish to appear to belong to the Roman elite. Why were the modern wall decoration exchanged for an old-fashioned style of design, which had been widespread 100 years earlier and had in practice long since disappeared? It would have been more logical to assume that the householder would wish to display his material and cultural wealth by means of the most stylish decoration available, rather than by means of an old-fashioned style that had not been relevant for more than a century. This phenomenon seems to have been related to a process whereby the Jews define themselves in relation to Roman culture, a process which as we have seen above, was of great importance on the eve of the Great Rebellion. It would appear that this ought to be seen as an act of opposition to the contemporary Roman culture and distancing of oneself therefrom. The owner of this house was still interested in displaying his wealth on one hand, but on the other hand, he wished to avoid the appearance of being Roman. He therefore made use of elements that would indicate his grandeur and wealth, but refrained from those things which would identify him as a bearer of Roman culture. The householder's self-definition was at this point one that was opposition to the Roman culture, and for that reason he separated himself from it by using an early and seemingly archaic style. He thereby distinguished himself from the contemporary Roman culture, with which not much earlier he had identified it. Support for this thesis can be derived from the fact that the renovation of the house occurred a short time before the destruction of Jerusalem, apparently during the rebellion. It is clear that the use of this old style was not derived from feelings of nostalgia, from longing for the past, or for passive maintenance of old tradition. Rather, it was an active process, whereby the person used an archaic style in order to define himself in the present. One may define this as an active conservatism. Who were the residents of the Palatial mentioned in Jerusalem? One is doubtless dealing here with a well-to-do family. Due to the large number of ritual baths, mikvaot, and because one is dealing with Jerusalem, researchers have tended to attribute this building to the priestly population who lived in Jerusalem, which was part of the Jerusalem elite. However, more recent research reveals that the numerous or ritual baths do not necessarily indicate a population of Kohanim, as such mikvaot are found in almost every house in Judea and in the Galilee from the 1st century BCE until the Bar Kokhba rebellion. As noted above, the school of Shammai played a dominant role in creating a cultural break between Jews and non-Jews. One may surmise that the owner of the Palatial mentioned in Jerusalem, a wealthy Jew who belonged to the Jerusalem elite, belonged to that stream which was violently opposed to the Roman conquest, but this does not necessarily imply that one is dealing specifically with a priestly family. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Eyal, and I hope that you will keep all the questions in mind concerning the symbolic of the first Pompeian style. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Susan Nashman Fraiman to you, who received her doctorate at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem on the subject of the Sabbath light, development of the vessels and customs of kindling the Sabbath lamp among the Jews of Ashkenaz. She's previously served as the collection manager of the Yad Vashem Art Museum and currently is a lecturer at the Rothbard International School of Hebrew University. We are looking forward to your lecture on the myth of the Judenstern, a multidisciplinary approach to Jewish art and artifact.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying till the end of the conference to hear our last session today. The subject of my talk today is the hanging Sabbath lamp of the Jews of Ashkenaz, known by some as the Judenstern, which you see here. Ashkenaz, as we've heard in the course of this conference, is the area that includes Germany, Austria, parts of France, and parts of Central Europe. One of the central questions of my doctoral research was, is this spouted lamp it's a hanging oil lamp, a uniquely Jewish implement, or was it something borrowed from the surrounding environment? With the exception of some 12 silver lamps, of which about 8 are extant, almost all of these lamps used for Sabbath lighting were made out of brass, as you see here, with very little differentiation and ornamentation. Some have animal heads, here you see eagles, adorning them. Some have small birds adorning the hanging ratchet that was used to raise and lower the lamp. Some have, here you see both the bird and some sort of geometric decorations. Very few have inscriptions of note. Artisanal marks are very rare. The lamp is not even mentioned by the earliest Jewish woman to chronicle her life, Glickle of Hamlin. So how can we investigate this object? Although comprehensive discussion of my research is beyond the scope of this talk, I would like to share some of my findings to illustrate a more general point, namely that research in the field of Jewish visual studies requires approaching the subject in multiple ways. What became clear to me in the course of the work is that one must take an interdisciplinary approach to studying these lamps. Jewish sources alone are necessary but not sufficient. Besides reading the Jewish halachic texts, including the Talmud and rabbinic responsa, I turned to manuscripts, memoirs, the writing of Christian Hebraists, and the history of material culture, specifically the history of lighting. In addition, in order to tease out the voices of women, I turned to halachic works written for women, to prayers written by and for women, and to works of art. Today I will demonstrate specifically how 3 of these different bodies of source material were crucial to my research of the hanging star-shaped Sabbath lamp, and without which one cannot really understand this ostensibly simple and standard object. First and foremost, of course, are Jewish sources, both halachic texts and printed books and manuscripts. Second are studies in material culture and the history of lighting, and the third discipline that we're going to see today is art history and the study of iconography. The fourth discipline, gender studies, is a topic unto itself, and we don't have time for it today. That's another lecture on its own. The subject of my research, the hanging brass Sabbath lamp, with anywhere from 6 to 10 branches in the form of a star, was used in Ashkenaz, as you see here in the Second Nuremberg Haggadah, here in detail. The lamp was lit with oil by women at the commencement of the Sabbath. We know about the shape of the lamp from manuscripts, such as this one, and this is the earliest manuscript in which it appears. It's dated to 1300 in the JTS collection. We also know of it, of course, from printed books, from Sefer HaMinhagim, and of course from the works of Jewish artists, notably Moritz Oppenheim and Alphonse Lévy. The lamp was, here you see the lamp here in the corner, by the way, and this is a depiction of the barber, right? This is a depiction of a barber. Why is there a Sabbath lamp here, right? The lamp was not only a functional object, but became a symbol for both the Jewish woman and, as we will see, the Jewish people. As mentioned, I will show how these 3 different fields of inquiry were brought to bear in researching the lamp. The first field, of course, was halakha and Jewish rabbinic sources. What does the halakha prescribe for the Sabbath lamp? Sabbath candlelighting, interestingly enough, is not commanded in the first 5 books of the Bible. It has a different halachic status than the biblical commandments. Interestingly enough, and unlike the Hanukkah lamp, the only requirements mentioned in the Mishnah and the Talmud have to do with acceptable fuels and wicks for lighting the Sabbath lamp. No mention is made of what its shape should be or from what material it should be made. This, to my mind, shows a certain halachic flexibility. However, the restrictions regarding fuel raise some interesting issues. Why, for instance, was olive oil the preferred fuel? Was it simply a reminder of the temple service, or were there other things at stake? Here, one has to investigate material culture, the second discipline I consulted, to see what fuels were used for domestic lighting by the surrounding culture and the kind of light olive oil makes. Both from a scientific and historical perspective, olive oil burned the purest and was the most odor-free of all the available ancient fuels. Therefore, the Mishnah reflects a material reality as well as a spiritual one. The Sabbath must be a pleasant experience and not characterized by unpleasant smells. You can't have a stinky lamp over your table. But in addition, when investigating the history of home lighting, one discovers that the use of a foodstuff, such as olive oil, and an expensive one of that, right? Olive oil is expensive. To create light is practically non-existent in other cultures. Usually, inedible materials for food remains, like tallow, were lighting materials of choice. Thus, the halachic preference for olive oil indicates the special status given to the commandment to light the Sabbath lights, which is unique to the Jews. Moreover, in the ancient world and well into the Middle Ages and early modern period, lighting at night was a luxury. And this may even be part of the reasons that the Romans derided Sabbath candle lighting, even while Josephus wrote that many pagans adopted the practice. By the way, it is interesting to note here that the earliest references to candle lighting are not in Jewish texts, but were actually made by these Roman writers, presumably because it was anomalous to their culture. For another example of the confluence of halachic writing and material culture and the importance of knowing both, we have only to turn to Rashi's commentary on the Talmud. Rashi is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He lived from 1040 to 1105. In his commentary to the Talmud tractate Shabbat on page 21a, he writes that the word ner, there's a word in Hebrew ner, and he defines ner as a koizel. It's written Kuf Resh Vav Yud Zayin Lamed. And this is one of the difficulties in understanding early rabbinic writings on the subject, because it's not clear what ner meant. In modern Hebrew, ner is a candle, usually molded or dipped mass of wax that contains a wick that's burned for light. But in the ancient period, ner had many denotations. A nail could be a ceramic oil lamp, or it could be a wick, or it could be a candle. In the Middle Ages, this multiplicity of meanings persisted, and by the way, this was paralleled in French terminology as well. This wide linguistic field makes it very difficult to understand the writings of the early halachic writers. For instance, the Ravya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yoel Halevi, who has already been mentioned by other scholars at this conference, was the first halachic decisor to specify that one needs a minimum of 2 nerot on the Sabbath. Did he mean flames, candles, or lamps? From his text alone, one cannot understand his intention. This in turn explains the mistaken assumption by some modern scholars that the Sabbath lighting was done primarily with 2 candles, even in the Middle Ages. To return to Rashi, the term croisel no doubt comes from the ancient French word croisel, which meant lamp. And in all likelihood, it referred to a lamp like this, one which was excavated at a castle in France, you see from the south of France from the 14th century. The name may even derive from the cross shape of the lamp, because the word for cross in French is croix, so it might have a similar root. So the discovery of this French domestic lamp shows us that yes, the Jews adapted local implements for Sabbath lighting. Therefore, by extension, is the multi-branch star-shaped hanging brass lamp with which we are so familiar, is it really a Jewish implement? Here again, a combination of the study of halachic writings and material culture is essential. Early rabbinic texts talk about the lighting of hanging glass lamps, which in Hebrew are called ashashiot, to inaugurate the Sabbath. Rabbinic authorities required that if the lamp was lit all day, however, on Friday, let's say you had your lamp burning all day in your house, it had to be extinguished and relit at the beginning of the Sabbath to show that it was being lit specifically for the Sabbath. At the same time, a study of typical domestic lighting implements from the areas of Europe in which Jews lived in the Middle Ages showed that most of them were not suitable for use on the Sabbath. They were very small, usually designed, as mentioned earlier, for burning leftover cooking fats, which did not need to be purchased or fabricated. Thus, it would seem that there was a kind of halachic pressure to find or adapt an object for Jewish usage that was to be used only on the Sabbath. This is where the croisel mentioned by Rashi comes in. It was a lighting implement that was suitable for oil, burned a number of hours, let me just go back to it for a second, and didn't need constant attention that would be problematic on the Sabbath, as did other home lighting implements. Most people used lighting implements that went out quickly or didn't burn that long or needed constant trimming of the wick and so forth. In fact, the earliest objects most similar to the star-shaped hanging lamp used in the Jewish home were elaborate Romanesque period bronze lamps. One was excavated in London, is on exhibit in the medieval section of the Museum of London today. The lamp, made from a copper alloy, dates from the 12th century. The museum's label states correctly that this lamp is similar to Sabbath lamps used by the Jews. Another such lamp is located in Erfurt, Germany. And a third was formerly in a collection in France. This is the base of the Erfurt lamp. And this is where it's exhibited today, by the way, in the Jewish Museum in Erfurt. And here is a drawing of a lamp, which we no longer know where it is, but it was in the French collection in the mid-19th century and was completely described. Common to both the surviving lamps and the lost lamp is a decorated central post, which you see here. Can you see? Okay, decorated central post, and it was either cast or cut out. And here's where the third discipline, art history, comes in. Close examination of the central motifs of these lamps leaves no doubt that these items were actually Christian, probably used in church lighting, even though as recently as 2 years ago, the curators in Erfurt stated categorically that their lamp was of Jewish origin. And this is their website, by the way, for their museum and the lamp. Okay, so they claim this lamp is a Jewish lamp. The London lamp lends itself very easily to analysis. If you look here, here's the lamp again, and you see it has 3 registers, okay? 1, 2, 3. If you look at the middle register, you see this circular medallion. It's a design of the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of the Lord. And then if you look above and below, you see crosses that decorated. One of these is the Tau cross, which also exists on in a chapel in London, from the same period. So it's clear that this is a Christian lamp. Okay, the Erfurt lamp is decorated with some clearly identifiable biblical scenes, such as Samson battling the lion. This is Samson battling the lion here. And based on this reading, because of these scenes, it's been labeled as being Jewish. However, the existence of Jewish biblical scenes, that is, Old Testament biblical scenes, is not conclusive proof, as we know, of Jewish provenance. For instance, for the Christians, Samson symbolized the knight of Christian faith and was also often used in lighting implements. And here you see Samson on a reliquary box from the Cologne Cathedral, and here you see a candlestick in the shape of Samson. So he represented the knight of Christian faith, and they often used this motif. And some of the other medallions, which I don't have details of here, clearly depict the evangelists. Now here, the German and English curators are no doubt well-intentioned, and this responds to Annette Weber's talk this morning when she talked about the need of compensating for the Holocaust and the lack of Jewish presence in present-day Germany by they have sort of put the Jews into things that really were not Jewish, and sort of increased Jewish presence, as it were. Nevertheless, in the name of intellectual honesty, we must not approach these objects predisposed to see Jewish themes where none exist simply because of their form. In short, it is highly probable that these 3 early lamps were Christian. Another question that arises is how and where were Jews exposed to these items in the first place? We know that Jews served as pawnbrokers in various communities and that church silver and other items were often used as collateral. Silver church lamps of this kind may well have served as collateral too. Seen by the Jews, this object was adapted for synagogue use, and this is from the fragment from the Ambrosiana Library of Kol Nidre, soon upon us. And here you see the hanging lamp is sort of used as a ner tamid, an eternal light, in front of the Aron Kodesh. There are other examples of appropriation of Christian objects for Jewish use. For example, another ecclesiastical item that was adopted by some Jewish communities is the aqua manile. And these were lion-shaped pitchers. They're in the shape of a lion, and they were used for water libations in the church. This one has a Hebrew inscription on it, you see here. This is in the Walters Museum in Baltimore. It says here, has the blessing for Netilat Yadayim, for washing of the hands. And this one was in the Steinhardt collection. And here's the inscription, has a name on it, and the name is Brachia Segal. Segal, as you know, Skam Levi'im, the Levites, and they're responsible for hand washing of the Kohanim in the synagogue. Where the Kohanim in Chutz La'aretz abroad, they bless in the high holidays and festivals. To return to the lamps, just as the aqua manile is an example of a Christian object that was adapted by the Jews for synagogue use, so too probably that these Romanesque star-shaped Christian lamps used in churches served as models for certain synagogue lamps. And for instance, a star-shaped lamp, very similar to these Romanesque ones, with a decorated central post divided into registers, was used in the synagogue of Offenbach, Germany, until 1938. It is likely that the star-shaped lamp then migrated from the synagogue to the domestic setting. Some like these elaborate silver lamps that we're very familiar with and have been written about extensively, but most in a simpler form. By the 16th century, the more modest brass star-shaped hanging lamp was ensconced in homes, as we saw in the numerous illustrations that we saw before, Sefer Hamin Hagim. By the way, the most common number of branches was 8, followed by 6. I would like to turn to the title of this talk, The Myth of the Judenstern. Judenstern is a term that has been adopted by several scholars of Jewish art, starting with Guido Schoenberger, who served as a curator at the Jewish Museum in New York and a lecturer at NYU. Schoenberger was a refugee from Hitler's Germany, and before he managed to escape to the States, he served as the joint curator of the Rothschild Museum in Frankfurt. Schoenberger found the term Judenstern used by 16th century Christian silversmiths in their hallmarking book, and the Jewish Museum continued using it in their publications, such that it was adopted by other scholars and institutions of Jewish art, as well as auction houses. This is a page from the Steinhardt sale 2 years ago, where they talk about this lamp, as I call it a Judenstern. In fact, lamp, as opposed to Judenstern, seems to be the non-Hebrew term most used by rabbis. For although the term Judenstern implies that the lamp was unique to the Jews, it also suggests alterity and otherness. Like the renaming of our Tanakh as the Old Testament, the Judenstern has stuck, even though evidence shows that this term was not used by Jews themselves or even by most Christians. But it is true that the lamp's unique usage from the 14th century by the Jews led it to become attributed to the Jews. It was an attribute of the Jews. In this print from Metz from 1664, you see a Jewish merchant, and he's identified by the following caption: "I am Jewish and acquired my wealth through cunning and finesse." Okay, and notice the lamp in the background. Everyone see the hanging lamp here. It is the object that identifies the merchant as a Jew, while the other objects were perhaps items in his pawn shop or signs of his wealth. In the 19th century, as mentioned earlier, two Jewish artists featured the lamp prominently, Maritz Daniel Oppenheim and Alphonse Levy. By the time both of these artists create these affectionate and nostalgic depictions, Sabbath observance is beginning to wane. It is not clear why and when this kind of lamp fell out of use with the non-Jewish population, but in any case, at a certain point, the star-shaped hanging oil lamp became a uniquely Jewish implement until the modern period. Here in an ad from 1922, very poignant, we see that the hanging lamps were still being sold in Germany, and this is from the Jüdische Gemeinblatt from Frankfurt, and we notice that the term Judenstern does not appear. Thus far, we have seen how the hanging Sabbath lamp developed as a response to the tension between the requirements of the halakha and the needs of everyday life. What led to the gradual decline in the use of the hanging Sabbath lamp among the Jews? Again, at least part of the answer comes from the history of lighting. In the 19th century, there was a massive revolution in lighting technology, culminating in the discovery of electricity. One of these innovations was the advent of synthetic wax, stearine, and later paraffin. Both public and private lighting changed drastically. The Sabbath lamp was not needed for home lighting in the same way. These technological changes led to a change in the way the commandment was observed and even perceived. Today's candle lighting has little to do with actual home lighting and has become much more symbolic. By the late 19th century and early 20th century, Poland became a center of candlestick manufacture, and there was more room for individual taste in the choice of lighting implements. The more or less standard hanging Sabbath lamp gradually became a thing of the past. To conclude, and to paraphrase Mark Twain, recent reports of the death of the field of Jewish art are greatly exaggerated. The study of Jewish visual culture requires us to relate to a multitude of sources and disciplines, including material culture, gender studies, Jewish texts, and art history. I hope that in this talk I've demonstrated the necessity of a multidisciplinary approach in our field, and also the advantages that come from exploring the material both from a Jewish perspective as well as from the perspective of the surrounding cultures. The hanging Sabbath lamp from Ashkenaz proves that the creation of many Jewish artifacts is not a random blind borrowing, but reflects a complex interaction with the environment, the study of which can be enlightening for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think you already made up the field for interdisciplinary research, with which we will conclude this fantastic conference. And I have the pleasure to announce the very last lecture of the conference, held by Monika Czekanowska Gutman, who is an assistant professor at the Institute of Art History at the Warsaw University. Monika Czekanowska Gutman is particularly interested in comparative iconography of biblical themes taken up by 19th and early 20th century Jewish and Christian artists. She holds BA and MA in art history, an MA in Jewish-Christian relations, and in addition to that, a BA and MA in Hebrew studies. currently she's working on a postdoctoral project granted by the National Science Center in Poland, which explores the visual representations of the Pietà in modern Jewish and Christian art. And I think you're presenting us part of your research with your lecture on what is Jewish about the Pietà.
So first of all, I would like to thank you very much to Miriam, to Sarah and to Ilya for this great opportunity to be here and to present in front of you. I could say that this is a very small part of my research that actually started a while ago, so I still have more questions than answers. And yeah, so in her book Judaism and Visual Image, a Jewish Theology of Art, Marisa Rafal asked the question, which is a question that I'm sure that all of you ask quite often: what is about Jewish art that makes it Jewish? I'm not going to talk about the full details of the Jewish art debates, pro and contra the existence of Jewish art, but I would rather to focus on a different point. So returning to Rafal's question, maybe our question as well, I would like to pose a related question. What is Jewish in the predominantly Christian motifs such as the Pietà? The Pietà, as we all know, and if you open the dictionary, the Greek Dictionary of Art, we can read that this is a devotional image of the Virgin Mary mourning the dead Christ who lies across her lap. This image originally developed in German convents as the wooden group sculpture, and this is one of the first examples, with a meaning and a function that was strictly religious. So it does not only express the material grief, but what's more, the mystery of the incarnation of the Christian God and his sacrificial death. The research of the Pietà was initiated by Ziva Mishai-Meisels in her illuminating article on Jewish Jesus, and then developed in her impressive book on the representation of the Holocaust in art. And I would like to thank you to Ziva for being sort of inspiration all the time for my work, my small research. In this paper, I would like to explore the Pietà and Pietà-like images in modern Jewish art, specifically in the works of Jacob Steinhardt, Mane Katz, and Marc Chagall. So let me only explain that the main point for me, and here I am arguing against some scholars who claim that due to their theme, for example, Chagall's crucifixion would be considered Christian, while his images of fiddlers and rabbis would be designated as authentically Jewish. For me, it is not the subject, but the treatment and the context in which the work of art is created that may determine Jewish perspective. So I am aware that my choice is subjective, but I hope to show how these chosen artists respond, in my view, in fascinating ways to this motif and adopt it to a Jewish world. And I would like to start with Jacob Steinhardt. I'm not going to talk a lot about his biography, because I'm sure you all more or less know. He was born in Zerkov. At that part it was Germany. Today it's in Poland. He is the co-founder of the Palatial group, together with Ludwig Meidner and Adrisa Jantul. And he painted mostly, as we know, biblical scenes, but he created several well-known Christian pieces as the Adoration of the Shepherds, the Head of Christ, and the Pietà. Ziva Mishai-Meisels states that two factors in particular inspire Steinhardt's Christological works: the anti-Semitic outburst and the fear of pogroms in Russia from 1911 and 12, caused by the Mendel Bailey's blood libel trial, and the murder of the Russian Prime Minister in September 1911. Steinhardt included a direct response to these events in his works entitled Pogrom, of which the one from 1913 is the most famous. In it, he depicts an army of furious men throwing Jews with knives, throwing stones at them and beating them. The Pietà I would like to look now was created almost at the same time. This is the dry point, and it was created in 1913. As we can see, in this work, Steinhardt does not follow the established Christian iconography, painted Mary and Christ in the similar poses to those known throughout the history. Here are some of the examples. We can also add Michelangelo's Pietà. Rather, Steinhardt refers to the lesser known iconography of the half figure of Mary bowing carefully towards the head of Christ and gently embracing it. So he is showing a sort of more intimate relationship. The viewer is invited to read the work from right to the left, as the Hebrew is read. Seeing first a three-quarter head of Christ squeezed in the right-hand corner of the dry point, and then a dominant best portrayal of Mary. Mary's eyes are old and tired, and her mouth is slightly open, as in a scream. Looking at the head of her son helplessly, it's not clear whether she is embracing it, or as in Christian examples, or cleaning the blood coming from his mouth. Perhaps the later action is the only thing she can do, with her son's body lying there in agony after a severe beating of a moment ago. The impact of the scene is all the stronger because of the highly impressionist style, the more precisely the pathetical style, anchored by sharply magnificent, convulsing, clearly delineated angular lines with strong use of shading and manneristic dissertation. Steinhardt decides here to imbue both figures with Jewish characteristic, albeit step in physical stereotypes. He represented Mary as an old woman with curly hair and protruding ears. However, it is her hooked nose that makes her portrayal characteristic. Also, Jesus' face is the face of an old man. His nose is prominent and his eyes deeply set. Obviously, the faces display slightly exaggerated features, which in the hands of a non-Jewish artist might be interpreted as a caricature. Steinhardt didn't intend his right point to provide negative representation of Jews. Rather, he aimed to demonstrate their Jewish origins. To put it another way, he employs the stereotypes to celebrate, not to disparage. In this case, augmenting the Jewish origin of Christianity, but he even went further in making the Christian theme a form of a visual polemic, also as many other artists before him, addressed to Christians as a condemnation of their action against Jews. Before the war, too, the theme of the Pietà was also represented by Jewish artists who had managed to escape the war employed in the Holocaust context. One of these artists was Monika, born in a small town in Ukraine, and though he received an Orthodox religious education and was expected to be the rabbis, as Michael Reagan put it, instead he became a painter of rabbis. He was very famous for painting the Heder pupils, Yeshiva students, in a manner that they have long and oval figures, narrow noses, and big black eyes. Contemporary Madonna, as this is the work I would like to talk about, is not the only Mariological work in cuts over. He painted also maternity and made various versions of mother with dead children after the World War II. Contemporary Madonna was painted in Paris in 1936, where the artist enjoyed the Parisian bohemia life. Monika depicts here a half-length figure of Mary in a blue veil with blonde white-robed boy. whom she is tenderly embracing, and a black boy sleeping peacefully on her lap. The artist sets the figure of Mary against a dark grey background, emphasizing her red hair and dark eyes. She looks towards us. Her lips are parted and sobbing, and her mouth open in a scream. Her pain seems to be too heavy to be carried. It must be shared. It is worth noting that screams, either of men, of dying men, like in Lebron Luke's The Scream, or mothers devastated over the loss of their children, became a widespread symbol of the World War II in general and the Holocaust in particular. With contemporary Madonna, many cats also attempt to vary the less common iconography of Madonna and the child in a manner, which is interesting, which suggests that he is dead. And by doing so, she refers to the Pietà, and also he refers to the Pietà. Indeed, at the first glance, it would seem that it also reflects old masters' influence, for example, Giovanni Bellini's Madonna enthroned. In the way it represents the body of a child lying horizontally asleep on his mother's lap, with one hand, as you can see, lying in unmistakable references to the Pietà pose. Also, we can find the influence, or we can trace the influence of El Greco in the image of Mary's face, not obviously in this work, but in many others. A youthful age by extreme grief, and above all, in the arrangement of the blonde child, who seems to be fainting and stretching out his arms like El Greco Christ. However, looking more closely, we can see that the black-haired boy is lying on the talit, a prayer shawl. So it seems that the child is dead. And what is also interesting, that as in Steinhardt's Pietà, the blood is gushing from a wound in his forehead and ear. So apparently Manekatz must have known of Steinhardt's Pietà, as he also refers to a beating. Perhaps he also knew Plichovsky's work, showing a Jewish man seated on a sort of a bench, mourning a dead body wrapped in a talit. Next to the child legs, we can also find a skula, kippah, that looks similarly to the child, and it was made of the same material. Obviously, both the talit and the kippah are religious accessories and evoke the connotation with Judaism. When Manekatz was creating contemporary Madonna, the persecution of the Jewish people were increasing in Nazi Germany, and the anti-Semitic propaganda was appearing in all over the place. But it was not only the reason why he might have dealt with this topic. Jacques Lazan once wrote that the artist's work was too deeply marked by his birth, the memory of the old ghettos of Central Europe, even to break from it altogether. And at the same time of the persecution, this obsession was to become, with distance and even more powerful, more living in artist's heart. What is striking, however, about the Pietà is that, contrary to Steinhardt, Manekatz adds a new character to this scene. If the artist had depicted only Mary and the Jewish boy lying on her lap, that one might have interpreted the painting as showing the Madonna mourning her dead Jewish child, and thus representing the suffering of the Jewish victims of the Nazis. However, the presence of the blonde child, in my view, complicates the story. Who is this infant? Is he a Christ, as claimed by Zivan, Shai Meisels, and if so, then what we have here is the Madonna holding two children, Christ and that Jewish child, and also the pose of child Jesus bending over or even fainting with his eyes closed suggests that he pities his Jewish brother. Or perhaps it is not a Christ, but an angel, as he also has wings attached to his back and is wearing the long white robes, typically of the images of the angels in Christian art. So he may also be the angel that accompanies accompanies the scene of the Pietà, where the angel, together with other figures presented, mourns Christ. Another possibility is that the burnt boy is the soul of Jewish body, attending now to heaven, but the last interpretation obviously demands further research. And undoubtedly, contemporary Madonna speaks also, like Steinhardt, to a Christian audience about Jewish persecutions, evoking the pitiful reaction of an angel, encourages the cessation of such persecution. And finally, I would like to show you the last work, which in my view is most interesting, most complex, and I would like to talk about this work. I would like to devote a little bit more time to this work. In the aftermath of the Shoah, Chagall recognized the need for an image that could evoke the horror of the war that had ended just a couple of years before. This he communicated partly through the use of color, which always has a symbolic meaning in Chagall's art, but also through the iconography. As we can see, the intensive red of the Pietà is used to elucidate the apocalyptic landscape of the upper part of the painting, which creates the background for a man standing on the ladder next to the skeleton of the cross, the sun, and a couple of unidentifiable animals. As this extensive red travels down the canvas, it becomes a grey level with black lines in the middle part of the picture, intensifying with a mighty thrust from the apocalyptic landscape from above. The red tones, as we can see, appear also in the figure standing to the right of the center of the composition and contrast with this light color of the reclining male body in the center. The viewer's eyes, when we look at the picture, the viewer's eyes are first caught by the central group, where we can see Mary, who is tying her head slightly to the right, looking comfortable. In exposing her large breast, she resembles the nursing Madonna, as in this example. On her lap lies a naked, inert flesh-colored body of a young man, positioned horizontally as in the Pietà. But what is interesting in this portrayal, the most visible element seems to be the bird, which is contrary to the other Chagall's crucifixion, when we can see Christ's face more visibly. So here, the artist is not interested in stressing his facial feature. He is more interested on the posture and the gesture of the figure in the center. And also there are other players, we can say, in this scene. So to the right of the Pietà group, there is a bird or a sort of an animal. There is a connection between this figure and Mary, and this is not only achieved through their standing very close to each other, but also through the colors. The place this helpful man occupies is usually reserved in Christian art for St. John. Opposite to him, an animal-headed figure, probably the god, I'm not sure, is looking in Christ's direction. This figure stands in the place usually reserved for Mary Magdalene herself. In the upper part of the painting, we can see Joseph of Arimathea, who, according to Gospel, removed the nails from the Christ cross, and now is taking care of the nails that are left. But more is happening here. There are different animals who are gathered above, in the middle, but their forms are barely visible. So in terms of its iconography, perhaps this scene is the reminiscent of the conception of the Pietà, where we have Virgin flanked by St. John and Mary Magdalene, and similar to these examples. On the other hand, we can interpret this scene still differently. looking at the Christ figure, one can see that not only his hands seem to have bound, like those of Isaac, but also that Mary's left, upraised hand is reminiscent of Abraham's raised hand, holding the knife in the preparation for sacrifice his beloved son. Chagall, aware of the Christian parallel between Christ and Isaac, opted for a Jewish motif by intentionally referring to Christian visual images. It seems that by depicting a Pietà in the mother of Akedah, he was influenced by Abel Pan's sacrifice of Isaac, Pan, a Latvian Jewish artist who became a teacher of the Bezalel school in Jerusalem, show that Isaac facing his father in a Pietà pose-like. Further studies shows that in both groups of the Pietà, as often in Chagall's work, we have an animal features. And very interesting is this figure, the animal standing next to the central group. Perhaps it is the ram from the Akedah, and here is the example. So, to attempt to analyze even briefly the attitude of the Jewish and Christian religious towards the sacrifice of Isaac is a complex undertaking. But I would like to say only a few words that probably you all know, that's in Akedah, in Genesis 22, in Jewish tradition it signifies Abraham's obedience and faith, whereas for Christian it is the God the Father who sacrificed his only begotten Son for the redemption of the world. So thereby the Akedah is the prefiguration of the crucifixion. Chagall's rendition of the Akedah also is in line with the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, where there is emphasis on the fact that Isaac was actually sacrificed. The motif of Isaac's sacrifice is also the paradigm of Jewish martyrdom, and there are some scholars, as Jacob Neusner, who emphasizes that the Akedah provided the key understanding to the Holocaust. So, approaching the end of the discussion, I would like to refer to Carol Demley, the anthropologist scholar, who rightly stressed that actually in the story of the Akedah, the mother and the child, Isaac and Sarah, have little place in the discourse, as the focus is on Abraham and God. I would like to conclude that Chagall's Pietà, by combining the iconographical type of the Pietà with the Akedah and by depicting the mother-child relation, throws a new light of the viewpoint of the mother in Akedah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this concluding paper. I would like to have you here on the board, so we have still time now to discuss the last session, and I would like to encourage you to pose your questions.
I have a couple of different points to make. For Steve, I just thought it was interesting that Boris Schatz in 1998 in the Palatial publication suggested that each Jewish home should have a Jewish corner with different objects in it. So this might relate to living Menorah.
Did he say it should be a little Menorah?
Yeah, so really like half the page just discussing the idea of having a Jewish corner and what should be in the Jewish corner. And for Susan, just first of all, thank you for all your wonderful lectures. I just wanted to say that the morphology of the Shabbat lampe or Judenstern, it continued in the Jewish world. If you check about 200 lamps in different collections, you will always find that in the Israel Museum collection, in the Jewish Museum in London, just about any collection of these lamps, all of a sudden you come upon a 7-branched lamp. And this is related to the Kabbalistic, Suffolk Kabbalistic writings. It already was in Schnell of the Greek of the Corvus,
before that, a halachic writer, I'll remember his name, I think Nordlingen, he writes that there should be, this is something, by the way, that we all have to, and Stephen's talking about this too, is the should and, the prescribed and the real and the ideal. And even though he writes about it, it didn't exist. There was only one 7-branch German hanging star lamp I found. Only one out of the 40 that I cataloged. So the 7 is predominantly among the Sephardi communities. It's in the Sephardi, yes, that's where you find the 7 wicks.
Yes, please.
Few remarks. First of all, of the hundreds of positions that were offered for the emblem of the state, only very few used the Artefact, which is obviously, and the one that was second place used a traditional tree-based lamp, and also the one that won by Shamir, the first proposition was not the one with the Artefact.
Right.
Another one is that Gershom Shokin was the main opponent to the emblem of the state.
No, there were 2 of them. Gershom Shokin, who didn't like the first drawing. I don't know what he thought about the second drawing. The first drawing by the Shamir brothers was really ugly. And all the complaints that he had about it, in fact, in my book, I put Shokin and Rav Herzog as 2 people at opposite ends of the system who equally disliked that heavy, clunky, rather traditionalist thing that the Shamir brothers were asked to make. And when you go through the state archives, and if anybody wants them, I've copied them all, and they're in my computer, so you can have them. If you go through the state archives, you get to a point where somebody tells the Shamir brothers to make this, but there's no document that says who. My guess is he had funny hair, not just white, and that he made it. That's sort of my guess on the subject, right? Because he made most decisions. But what I found most interesting was the one that Rav Herzog and Shokin liked, which is the one that Sukenik liked, which in his usual way was deeply self-promoting because it was based on the floor from Jericho that was his piece. And it was in this sort of nice, sort of turquoise, modernist format that if you were a socialist you could tolerate, but if you were a revisionist you dislike, right? Right? It's a beautiful thing. It was made by Ismar David. It's a wonderful thing, but it would have been the least masculine national symbol of every national symbol of the era. I think that's the way to describe it. It was just too sweet, and the Knesset just came down on it, which means probably Ben Gurion came down on it. And we have a set of stamps, and if anybody owns it, maybe Shalom, you have it, that I've only seen a picture of them, that were put out just at the time of the War of Independence. One that had the Palmach on it, and one that had Al-Ghanah, and one that had the Irgun. It's clearly before the Al-Talena. At a certain point, we don't have no more Irgun stuff, right? None of the Beitar symbol. And it's transformed. There was an article in Cherut, which is a newspaper of the revisionists, where when the symbol was chosen, where the guy actually says, "Great symbol, but they're trying to steal it from us." And so I think he got it right. They were trying to steal it from them. They were trying to nationalize it the same way they were trying to nationalize an army and all sorts of other stuff. But the amazing thing about that pile of stuff at the National Archive is how people we thought would have had a place like Rabban didn't, right? And this looks really clunky by the time you get to the late 40s. And everyone who was anybody was involved, and so the judges were Reuven and Sukenik, and they were the professional experts. So it was an amazing moment. Bishori wrote about it really, really well, but there's more to say. So for example, India made very similar decisions at about the same moment about their symbol, about using an archaeological symbol that everybody knew but belonged to no one. There were similar kinds of conversations about what should be written underneath the symbol. I'm going to apply to the National Endowment for the Humanities to go to India and see it, because then I get to go to India.
So now, Naomi, next please.
I have 2 questions to Susan, and thank you for bringing this topic up. One is, do we ever see, and maybe I missed and you said it, do we ever see something like this Judenstern, okay, in Christian illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages and on, or early modern period? The other is of the Dutch group that do use 8 spouts. There are at least 3 that I remember in the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam that have a separation, separating 2 out of the 7. So you can actually use it also on Shabbat, and on Shabbat, you might make the choice of either using oil or using candles, or just using the 2 wicks with oil.
Right, okay.
So that's just a...
Right, well, that's a very good question about the Christian manuscripts. I have to say, I scoured photographs of churches. I did look, I went through a lot of books on home lighting, and a lot of those books do incorporate artwork, and none of them showed, you see similar you see oil burning lamps. You do, but you never see the exact one. As far as, I didn't really, I have to say that my doctorate, I was advised to focus only on Ashkenaz, so I really didn't go into Amsterdam, Italy, England, I didn't. But I would say, and you know this, we all know this as well, and somebody in this room I'm sure will say, oh, my grandmother has one and they put electric bulbs in it.
Yes,
Or the one that I showed you from Offenbach, they added candle holders, because candles, once you could use the artificial candle, the candle was easier to maintain than the oil. The oil would drip, right? The oil had a lot of disadvantages. So the candles, once they came into common use, I'm not saying that they didn't use candles before, but beeswax in certain parts of Europe, candles were made mostly by the church. In Poland, it's a whole different story, and I didn't go into Poland today. But, so that's another topic.
You know, the croissant was Christian.
It was used in the French in homes and domestic lighting.
Well, croix.
I didn't say that, Judy. That croix, the word cross in French is croix, and the lamp was in a cross shape. But the lamps used in churches did not reflect that. Also, the Christians have a different approach to lighting, and they were more interested actually in candle lighting, because wax symbolizes the body of Jesus. No, and that doesn't like what I'm saying.
But you can't say it.
I have 2 questions, 3. Yes, please.
To Eyal. What you said was very convincing. I just would like to ask why you think that it was the same person who did the 2 layers of paint. Why not? The first one died, his son was much more, Bet Shammai. No, you kept on saying, he changed. So if you're talking about changes that occur, he could have sold his house, you should leave it a little bit more open.
Yes, you're right.
Is all
You're right.
I'm saying.
But it's not just the main idea. The second person who changed it, the active, it made it an active.
No.
Don't change the idea about
fine.
the.
That's fine. It's just a matter of
Yes, you're right.
I have just 2 comments. One is for Susan, but you answered now that you didn't get into other non-Ashkenazi Judenstern lights. I just wanted to comment, Susan, that there are depictions of lamps used in Balkans, and I have like painters painting woman doing kiddush on a such lamp in Sarajevo. One comment amongst Sfaradi.
Yes, I would love to see that.
I'll send you. And the other comment is for Monika, which is very nice introduction of what you're doing now. Thank you. And actually something that Ziva brought, but didn't mention, I'll mention, that for Chagall, right, you have Ardon, who did the same thing with Sarah and Makeda, sort of mentioning, through Yitzhak being dead, Isaac dead next to Sarah, you have the similar switch from Pietà from Akedah to Pietà.
Annette Weber?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to comment on Jonathan. First of all, we have the term, the Yiddish term at least, for the lamp in should. Should quotes that there is a lamp, and that's it. They never talk about Judenstern. It's lamp. Lamp. No, not lampe, lamp. It's without an E. And it's referred in Yiddish in should itself. So he literally quotes the term in Hebrew letters. He goes that far. And secondly, I don't know if you're aware of the new publication of Erfurt coming out this year, where they discussed the Erfurt hanging lamp. And well, I wrote a contribution as well. I'm not that sure that it couldn't be Jewish, because this leave aside the Shemshon issue. That, of course, you're right. It's both in Jewish and Christian art. It's hard to tell what comes from where, but there are some other representations which are unique in Christian art. We have no parallels at all. These two figures holding the book together. And it's also not clear what are these four persons sitting there. And in the end of the 12th century, and the datation is brought back, or brought at once. It's said to be now end of the 12th century. It's no longer 13th. According to the analysis of the metal and also of the stylistical analysis, there were sitting prophets at the time. It's possible.
Okay.
And in addition, we have some depictions of these brass lamps, not exactly the same time, but brass lamps with several snouts depicted in English medieval folklore. There exist a few examples. And the question is whether this unique lamp, which is truly unique, couldn't be the document of, again, a Christian and Jewish cultural transfer. This is the later 12th century, is the period when there was a lot of exchange going on as we have the disputes and the debates. And the question is whether this lamp could be such an example of cultural and even theological exchange. Because it's very hard to imagine this hanging somewhere in a Christian church. Where do you put it? For which kind of ritual usage?
Well, you're proving my point, actually. So thank you, because first of all, the iconography, actually, the Erfurt lamp is somewhat similar to this French lamp, which is described in great detail, which is missing. We don't know where it is today. I didn't bring the slide showing the evangelists and the seating figures in Erfurt, because I actually would like to get better photographs from Erfurt, but the seated figures do look very much like evangelist images. They do. And I do think that there is some kind of cultural dialogue going on. I definitely do. But I don't think it went from the Jews to the Christians. I think it went the other way. I have to say that even though I might want it to have gone one way, I think that it's more likely that these objects, and we don't know why they fell out of use in the Christian world, we don't really know. And we don't know, as you pointed out, there really isn't a place for it in the church. There really isn't a place for it in the church. Unless it was an ampel, unless it was like used to a church ampel.
Sorry, the ampel didn't exist before the 13th century. There was no such use of an ampel, because this indeed is an import during the Crusades. So, and in the later stage of the Crusades, I went back in tracking back the use of the ampel, and we have the earliest records in the very late 12th century as something very new, and the ample looks quite different of this topic. And it is even said that the church adopted it from the Jews. It's an adaptation.
That's the Ner Tamid. Then they're talking about the eternal life. They're talking about the idea of the eternal life.
That is not, well, that's the current opinion, that there was no eternal life in the church until the later, the very end 12th century, early 13th century. So, and it was done so in adaptation of a Jewish custom. So, right in this field, you have a kind of a different way of exchange. So I think one has to reconsider this in context of Christian and Jewish liturgy alike.
So the last question?
Yeah, I just stopped in the middle, so I want to finish the one idea from Steve. So anyway, looking at Italian Judaica, we can discuss it privately also. Looking at Italian Judaica, the Menorot appear a lot, as you know, and never with tripod base, as far as I remember. They always have some shattered bottom, so I don't know how much it's related. But they don't show the octagonal box, but there is one Hanukkah lamp. Maybe it's a forgery now, and maybe a thing. That on the back panel there is a depiction of the Arch of Titus Menorah. It's in the Stiglitz collection, so maybe. And there is one. And there is one ketubah from Lugo that is, I'm 100% sure that the artist saw the Arch of Titus, but he eliminated the base. But the upper section is identical to the Arch of Titus. This ketubah from Lugo. So just looking at Italian Judaica and see how it's relevant to what you said at the beginning. So I think it would be interesting.
They also put flames on the menorahs, which you see that it found its way into the urban Zionist and then into the Legion symbol, the hat pin. The idea of having the flames all lit is one of those things that was well known.
So let's think about the past, 18th century, 17th century, not
but earlier, 17th, 18th century Judaica, Hanukkah.
What's the difference of time between the exile and the creation of the Arch of Titus?
A decade. A decade.
10 years. Is that all?
Yeah.
So in memory would have still been.
The object was in the Temple of Peace down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah. In other words, you could have moseyed down and seen it. And so there's no, because so it would be impossible to have anything different.
People saw it.
People could see it. You could have gone, we actually have a statement that says, and then he describes the flames. When I went to Rome there, I saw the menorah, and I wrote too many places that this text fits perfectly well with what we know about the 2nd century in Rome, that the Temple of Peace was a public kind of space where anybody could walk in to see the various sculpture. They've actually found some of the bases of famous sculpture mentioned by Pliny and others inscribed. So my dream is that when they take the avenue of the empire, which of course has had its name changed, and take dig out the Temple of Peace, someone is going to find something that says lamp of the Temple of the Jews. That would be really nice.
So thank you all for the lectures. I would like to thank the participants of this discussion. I would like to thank very much Miriam and Ring there and I think it's up to you for the conclusion.
I would like to invite here Miriam and Sarah, please.
Dear colleagues and friends, we have reached the end of our conference, and it's my really pleasure to make a few closing remarks. Over 1.5 years of intensive teamwork preceded our meetings here, and I'm most privileged to have truly enjoyed to this way together with Dr. Miriam Reiner and Sarah Offenberg, and I have, of course, nevertheless, in the ocean of routine work for the conference organization, we were but a tip of iceberg. And the iceberg, or rather volcano, look, it is there. So it is our dear secretary of the Department of Jewish Art, Rachel Hanig, who is busy just this moment, and I have flowers for her too. If you'll get them, of course. In one moment, it's for her. It's a bus and so on and so on. During the last month, each of our lecturers and many guests were in steady contact with Leon Jacobi. With dozens of lists and hundreds of tasks and conversations, tens of PowerPoint presentations, a couple of lazy computers, and an unpredictable Skype yesterday in one of our sessions. I am also proud that Leor, one of our promising new doctoral students, was recently awarded a prestigious Bar-Ilan University President Scholarship. It's not scholarship here.
No flowers?
You need a smell.
We'll send you some. Electronic.
I also am truly grateful for our young student Adas Gabay. Adas is what? For her indispensable help in our premises. Svi of God, whom you know as a promising researcher and lecturer of our conference, is also the designer of our posters and program you have here. So thank you so much. And now, lastly and most importantly, I would like to express our feelings of privilege and honor to be entrusted with undertaking a gathering of such eminent people from around the world. About 45 presentations have enriched us, enhanced our knowledge, and given us plenty of to reflect upon. The success of the conference is due to all of you. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to close this conference by expressing my deepest gratitude to all of you who made this event a reality. Our conference was a nice and air-conditioned room to survive a sandstorm. The news says the worst one in the last 75 years that hitting the Middle East these days. For those of us who taking the nature symbolically
it may be a kind of reminder of the storms of violence and destruction that hit the region and is echoing far beyond. The tenacity for constructing and promoting spiritual values is our inexhaustible hope. Just a few days before the Jewish New Year, we wish all of you a lot of success, professional achievement, happiness and peace, and of course look forward to meeting again soon in the near future here and there all over the world. Thank you so much.